Jimmy! Jimmy! Jimmy!
Jimmy Brandt, 7 years old, is lost. Jimmy left a friend's house in the neighborhood at 3 in the afternoon. It's now after 6, and he's not home yet. His father and mother have been searching the neighborhood and phoning everyone who might have seen Jimmy.
Is Jimmy there? Well, he was at the Jensen. I thought maybe he stopped at your place on his way home. Yeah, sure. He'll turn up, but your Ruth's here, but look, she can't talk now, Jimmy. Okay, I'll have her call you. Oh, yeah, thanks.
The Wilsons?
Yeah.
He couldn't have gone that far.
Well, it's just a chance.
I thought Jimmy said he was going to the Jensen. I'm not sure. I was there in the kitchen and the radio was going and he popped his head in and when he asked if he could go, I'm sure he said he was going to the Jensens because he...
It wouldn't have made any difference. Now, either got lost on his way over there or on his way back. Now, blaming yourself is not going to help.
But if I just listened, if I'd only heard...
Look, we got the police out looking for him. All right, we've called everybody we know. Now, the only thing we can do now is wait. I'm going back now.
But you've already been up and down the street twice.
Yeah, well, maybe he didn't hear me.
Don?
Just listen to the phone, Ruth.
Ruth and Don Brandt are rarely as dependent on any single sense as they are this night of listening. For a phone's ring or a lost child's cry. Actually, all their senses are functioning, but at this moment, hearing seems crucial. Much of the time, they're aware of their senses as sources of routine information and of enjoyment. They're aware, as we all are, that in the early ages of history, the senses were primarily important for survival. Taste, smell, and hearing, for example. It's sometimes hard to realize how important they once were. Taste. Taste helped us tell which foods were safe to eat. With our sense of smell, we recognized the scent of danger in the jungle. Our nose was as keen as a bloodhound's. And in those days, we listened as intently as Ruth and Don, alert to every sound. Some sounds, even today, stir up fears. The approach of a storm, the chill cry of a wolf. Primal memories linger on. But our survival needs have changed. Taste and smell have become more sensual than sensory, associated with the frills and trappings of civilization, and the development of such social niceties as table manners. Over the centuries, the rituals involved in taste and smell experiences have marked the difference between mankind's many cultures. Differences as distinct as the sounds of languages, the spoken languages of nations, understood through hearing before anyone could read or write. But most of us today think of our senses as they relate to our daily comforts and needs. And most of us know very little about these senses. Our knowledge seems hidden beneath the surface, so that each new discovery sets forth new puzzles, new mysteries. We know that all three senses, taste, smell, and hearing, function with receptors located in specific areas of the head. Each is tuned to receive specific types of stimuli. Each gathers information from those stimuli, flavor, odor, or sound. and each relays the information to the brain by means of neural impulses. But the differences are great. The taste buds, which contain your taste receptors, are tiny cells located in clusters on the top and sides of the tongue. These are chemical receptors. The actual chemical processes are still poorly understood, but it appears that when food molecules mix with the chemical catalyst in saliva, they fit into certain receptor sites like keys in the appropriate keyholes. A tiny hair protrudes from each cell. It acts like a trigger, which makes the hair cells send a message to the brain. Once the food particles actually come in contact with your taste buds, there really isn't very much to taste, because taste alone has only 4 qualities: sour, bitter, salt, and sweet. It's true that you can detect more than 4 taste qualities on the tongue, but that's because many combinations of these 4 taste qualities are possible, and when they're mixed, we experience a different taste. It's something like mixing primary colors. Stir up blue and yellow, and you have green, a different color, but made up of 2 primary colors. But even before your taste buds begin to work, you may say, "I can just taste that." Then, when you do take a bite, temperature is important. No one wants hot tossed salad or cold fried eggs. And texture counts too. The taste receptors don't distinguish good from bad taste. The brain does that, without telling us whether something that tastes good is also good for us. But very early in life, we find that we like some tastes better than others. So mothers and food producers try to combine good taste with good for you. We are tempted with products designed to be tasty. And yet, though taste seems important to us, it's one of the least effective senses. It has local sensors which function only on contact and in a limited way. Taste alone plays a small part in the enjoyment of a meal. Sight and smell and sizzling sound also play a part. And at all ages, taste is a combination of sensory elements: sight, temperature, and texture. But the principal partner of taste is smell. Smell works in much the same way as taste. The nerve center for smell is in the upper portions of the 2 nasal cavities. Millions of tiny hair cells, much like those in the tongue, are the smell receptors. When we sniff an odor, we draw scent molecules up into the 2 nasal cavities. And as with taste, specific molecules seem to have specific receptor contact points. As soon as contact is made, a neural impulse goes to the brain. And again, it's the brain, not the receptor, that decides whether a smell is good or bad. But though it's much like taste, smell is far more sensitive. Smell receptors work from a distance, and in its way, the nose is as sensitive to faint odors as the eyes are to dim lights, and the ears to soft sounds. However, we rarely use the full potential of smell. We don't need it. In the world we live in, our survival is seldom dependent on one sense alone. On the contrary, we depend on a sophisticated interaction of all the senses in practically every situation. Take fire, a big killer. First, we'll probably smell it. Then, having sensed the danger, we check to see where it's located. Then our call depends upon someone hearing. If the firemen couldn't hear the boy's call, If no one heard the alarm or the sirens enabling the truck to get through, this boy's nose might not save him. So hearing, then, is a tremendously important survival sense. But survival depends on understanding the meaning of what we hear. Basically, hearing works much like taste and smell. Special receptors gather information from a stimulus source and relay it to the brain. The brain then decides what it is and what to do about it. But hearing is special and unique among the senses, not just because of its greater importance, but because of its special qualities. Probably the most unique quality of hearing is that it, alone among the senses, is in brilliant, vivid stereo. And the best stereo set you'll ever own is the one you're born with. Remember this, if these two ears should fail us, then all this stereo equipment is just so much useless junk. The basic principle of stereo sound, as opposed to mono, is in separation. Now, these speakers are separated just like our ears, in order that separate and distinct sounds can be heard from each. The main purpose of separation of the ears is to determine direction or location of a sound source. Your auditory system uses several methods of localizing and identifying sound sources, but all methods rely on stereo separation. That means one ear will be a little closer to the sound source than the other. Sound waves travel at 1,100 feet per second, but your ears pick up the slightest difference and tell your brain, which instantly reports what's coming from where. Sound waves are often compared to water waves. When you throw a stone into a pool, it creates ripples, which radiate outward from the source. But what you see is somewhat of an illusion. Actually, the individual molecules which make up any given wave don't move very far. Only far enough to strike the next set of molecules. Each set of molecules strikes the next, and so on. Individual molecules never go far, but the wave travels a great distance until it strikes a solid object. When a rigid object is struck forcibly, it vibrates. When a sound wave reaches the outer ear, it is funneled into the auditory canal, which aims this force directly at the eardrum, causing it to vibrate. Then the vibrating movement of the eardrum sets in motion the three little bones called ossicles, each in sequence. The hammer passes vibrations onto the anvil. Which passes them to the stirrup, which then plays on a membrane called the oval window. The vibrations from the oval window reach the hair cells in the cochlea, a fluid-filled cavity in the inner ear. The auditory receptors lie on the cochlea. These are tiny hair cells, much like those on the tongue and in the nasal cavity. From here, the auditory receptors fire off impulses to the brain, just as other receptors do for taste and smell. All sounds travel, reach the ear, and eventually the brain in basically the same domino effect manner, but sounds very sharply. There's little chance of mistaking this sound for this one, or this sound for this. Even similar sounds are readily distinguishable because of very explicit differences. For example, sounds differ in the number of cycles or vibrations per second. We call it their frequency. A low frequency of 3 cycles will have a lower pitch than a higher frequency of 6 cycles. Another key distinction between sound waves is amplitude. Amplitude simply means volume and is measured in decibels. The greater the amplitude, the louder the sound. This oscilloscope shows 2 sounds of the same frequency. Notice how each wave has a different shape. The second sound is of greater amplitude than the first, and the difference is the height of the wave. Like tidal waves in a hurricane, the ocean's waves don't come faster, but they are a lot higher, and that makes them more powerful. Another characteristic of sound waves makes one different from another: timbre. Timbre is the difference in sound you hear when 2 different musical instruments play the same note. Even though the frequency and amplitude are identical, notice the differences in the shape of these sound waves. Each musical instrument produces its own unique variations in sound. And these variations are what give music its wonderful richness in subtlety and depth, and make music a source of enjoyment to many people. But there are times when life isn't a matter of enjoyment. Ruth Brandt sits in the quiet room and waits. Night has fallen, but she's scarcely aware of the darkness. She's concentrating on listening for the sound of the phone that may bring news of her son, and even more for the sound of Jimmy's running feet on the sidewalk outside. These are the only sounds Ruth wants to hear. But the wrong sounds come to her, sounds she doesn't notice other nights. Somewhere, a faucet drips. Scratching at the door. A sound of a car horn. They catch her attention because her whole being is focused on listening. She is so intent that the first loud sound is a shock. She's almost afraid to answer. Ruth hears the voice of her old friend, the faraway Gene Baldrige. Jimmy has just now arrived there. He walked half across town, not realizing the distance and losing the way. But he's there. Jimmy's safe.
Ruth and Don Brandt drove to their friend's house to pick up their son, and probably the next day they set Jimmy straight about a couple of things, such as spoken language conveys much of the world's information, but effective communication requires that the message be sent with audibility adequate to the receiving system. Or as Ruth and Don put it to Jimmy, he should make sure his mother hears him when he tells her he's going to some unusual destination. And by then, most likely, Ruth could sit in the living room without hearing a dripping upstairs faucet. Her senses were functioning in their usual way and taken for granted.
We tend to take our senses for granted until one is impaired or lost. But permanent loss of any sense can be devastating. Consider this. Did you miss something? I was saying hearing is a major communications sense. But unless you're trained in lip reading, you missed what I said because you were deprived of the sound and couldn't hear. People who are faced with a loss of hearing have to learn to communicate all over again, using other senses, particularly sight, to compensate. And children who are born deaf are faced with even greater problems. Since they have no language basis to begin with, they have to learn to receive without receivers. With only half the basic tools for learning, they have a severe disadvantage, often wrongly mistaken for retardation. A silent world can be beautiful, but we would miss familiar sounds from dogs, cats, birds, even a baby's cry. And a silent world could be dangerous. Sounds describe what we can't see through mist on streets, or fog at sea. Everyday survival can depend on hearing sounds. A train whistle at a crossing, or the honk of a car horn on the street. We depend on our hearing, but the ear can take only so much. Scientific studies have shown that loss of hearing occurs gradually with continual exposure to noise levels of 85 to 90 decibels over a long period of time. The average level in a discotheque is 120 decibels. Here's what may happen. When hearing is damaged, healthy hair cells like this, with a normal round nucleus, are distorted. Hearing is permanently damaged. Exposure to dangerously loud noises can't always be avoided. And in small doses, it may not be harmful, but it needn't be courted. Let the world be your joy and have your place. Oh, love, dance and sing. Don't waste your tears, there's no time to cry. The years may seem long, they soon pass by. Make every hour as gay as spring. Oh, love, let's sing. Give your soul to the wind that blows. Oh, sometimes we deliberately block a sense, like this. Cover our ears to keep out a too loud sound. Sometimes we lose the capability of a sense without even realizing it. This is generally true of taste and smell, but it is usually only a temporary condition called adaptation. Adaptation occurs in the receptor cells. It's a process through which your nervous system adjusts to constant sensory inputs. Now, for example, if we're exposed to the same odor, this perfume, long enough, The receptor seems to get tired of firing the same message repeatedly and start to slow down. At the same time, the brain becomes less and less responsive to the signals coming in. Adaptability of smell can be an asset for people who live or work in or near such noxious odor sources as chemical plants and refineries. Once you get used to the smell, it doesn't bother you anymore. But because we can't get rid of all unpleasant odors in our home or on our person, deodorants, room sprays, aerosols, and perfumes are big business. Some kill the obnoxious odor. Some neutralize it. Some substitute a more pleasant scent. And all are widely advertised and commonly used. We seem to place a great deal of importance on the way our environments and ourselves should or should not smell. It all comes down to the fact that we no longer fully depend on our senses for survival as we once did. Taste, smell, and hearing give us much of the pleasure of living. Enjoyment of good food and drink, of good music, even the enjoyment of our environment itself. Pleasure, of course, is the preferred function for all of our senses, and the pursuit of pleasure seems to be almost a full-time occupation for many of us. It may be because we've created new dangers for ourselves, beyond the scope of our old survival senses. But we've released these senses for greater enjoyment of our world.